Story 1. The Hunger of Zero. Milo's life was in ruins, so when he stumbled upon the Origin Society, promising rebirth by starting from zero, he thought he'd found salvation. The secluded mountain sanctuary was eerie yet inviting, its members dressed in robes, faces hidden behind wooden masks. Mira, the society's leader, welcomed him with a smile that hid malice, whispering, "To be truly free, you must let go of everything." The rituals started innocently enough. Milo was stripped of his belongings and told to cleanse his mind. They shaved his head, burned his clothes, and forced him to drink a thick, bitter liquid that clouded his mind with strange visions. By the second day, he was plagued by hallucinations, a woman's blood-smeared face, twisted in terror, lingering in his mind. He told Mira, hoping for comfort, but she only smiled. Freedom requires sacrifice. You must part with what holds you back. As days went on, the rituals grew darker. One night, they gathered around a bonfire and were handed ceremonial knives. Each initiate was to cut into their own flesh, releasing old pain. The others cheered as blood dripped onto the earth, the crowd chanting in ecstasy. But what truly turned Milo's stomach was what came next. Each initiate was handed a piece of roasted meat, told to consume the past. As he bit down, the taste was unlike anything he'd known, sickening and metallic. When his blindfold slipped, he saw the truth. The meat came from a dismembered body on the altar. Mira watched, pleased. "Now you are reborn, cleansed of humanity," she declared, her voice full of reverence. Milo's terror grew as he uncovered the society's secret. They lured people to the sanctuary to be consumed, both in spirit and flesh. The final ritual involved a chosen one who would die so the others could feast and absorb their purity. He realized with a sickening twist that the woman from his visions was one of the previous sacrifices, her spirit trapped in this cycle of endless death. Desperate to escape, Milo tried to flee but was caught by Mira and dragged back to the ritual chamber. She handed him a dagger, smiling. "This is your final test. To start from zero, you must release the past entirely." He lunged at her, plunging the dagger into her heart, watching her blood soak the ground. But instead of collapsing, she only laughed, her body turning cold in his arms. As he stumbled out of the chamber, horrified, he caught his reflection in a broken mirror nearby. His own face was replaced by Mira's, eyes gleaming with her twisted smile. A new hunger stirred within him, overpowering, primal, as a voice echoed in his mind. "Now you are one of us." Milo's mouth watered involuntarily as footsteps approached from behind. A new initiate had arrived, looking as broken as he once did, unaware of the fate that awaited them. When Lizzie and Joel stumbled upon Elmwick, they thought the isolated village would be a peaceful new start. But the townsfolk's eerie fixation on the wipe, a mysterious ritual to erase memories and possessions every generation, was unsettling. During their first night, a woman, Mira, greeted them with a chilling smile, whispering, "Starting from zero is a beautiful thing. Memories weigh us down." When Lizzie and Joel stumbled upon Elmwick, they thought the isolated village would be a peaceful new start. But the townsfolk's eerie fixation on the wipe, a mysterious ritual to erase memories and possessions every generation, was unsettling. During their first night, a woman, Mira, greeted them with a chilling smile, whispering, "Starting from zero is a beautiful thing. Memories weigh us down." The following night, they watched villagers throw cherished belongings into a fire, chanting as they relinquished their memories, releasing the pieces of their past that bound them to reality. Lizzie couldn't bear to part with her grandmother's locket, nor could Joel let go of a small, battered photo of his late brother. As the flames danced, Mira noticed their reluctance and leaned in close, her voice barely a whisper. "Holding on can be deadly here. Those who refuse the wipe don't simply die, they're erased, piece by piece." The next morning, Lizzie was jolted awake by a scream echoing through the streets. They found a young woman lying motionless in the square, her face contorted in horror, her mouth open but her tongue gone. Villagers murmured she held on to her memories before returning to their homes with eerie calm. Haunted, Lizzie wanted to flee, but each attempt to escape was blocked by the villagers, who quietly surrounded them, murmuring, "You belong to us now." That night, they heard heavy footsteps and scratching at their door. Shadows twisted in the corners of the room as ghostly figures emerged, hollow-eyed villagers who had refused the wipe in past generations, damned to haunt Elmwick forever. Their bodies were incomplete, missing fingers, eyes, tongues, anything that represented their connections to the past. Desperate, Lizzie clung to her locket as if it could protect her, but a frigid hand ripped it away, and her memory of her grandmother dissolved, leaving a painful blankness. Joel, trembling, held his brother's photo close until ghostly hands seized him, pulling him toward the fire. As the flames consumed the photo, Joel's memories vanished one by one until he looked at Lizzie with vacant eyes. As dawn broke, Lizzie found herself standing alone in the square, the final initiate. Mira approached her, a strange sympathy in her eyes. "Starting from zero is our curse, and now yours." Lizzie's past had been stripped to emptiness, leaving her a hollow shell, a pawn for Elmwick's ritual. In her mind, a dark realization clawed its way forward. Every new resident was a sacrifice, a fresh soul condemned to perpetuate the village's twisted tradition. Just as the villagers prepared to leave her to her fate, Lizzie felt a memory, one she didn't recognize, slip back into place. Her hands shook as the vision sharpened. She saw herself much younger arriving at Elmwick. She had lived this cycle before, wiped over and over, trapped in an endless loop of erasure. She would be forever starting from zero. Adam, tired of his failures, arrives at a secluded camp to join a cult called the Zero Movement. Led by the eerie Father Elias, the cult promises a rebirth by starting from zero and erasing all past pain and identity. The first ritual is shocking. Each recruit is instructed to carve symbols into their flesh as an offering of their former self. Father Elias tells them, "Freedom comes when you're empty, free of names, memories, and attachments." Over time, Adam sees cult members grow eerily submissive, often staring into nothingness, reciting the mantra, "I am zero, I am nothing." Despite the horror of the rituals, Adam hesitates to flee, feeling oddly compelled by the cult's twisted logic. Late one night, he sneaks into a forbidden room and finds rows of preserved faces, gruesome masks hung like trophies. As he backs away in horror, he's caught by Father Elias, who whispers, "This is true freedom, Adam." Each face represents a person who embraced zero. Terrified, Adam makes a desperate escape. In the forest, he reaches into his pocket for his ID, needing proof he's still himself. But when he pulls it out, it's blank, just a plain piece of plastic. A chilling realization hits him. In some horrific way, he too has already started from zero. He finally reaches the main road, his heart pounding in his chest. But when he tries to hail a passing car, the driver doesn't stop. Instead, they slowly roll down the window, revealing Father Elias's face, a twisted, satisfied smile playing on his lips. "Did you think you could run from yourself, Adam?" Father Elias's voice echoes in his mind. There's no escaping zero. Adam collapses to his knees, the truth crashing down. He's not just physically marked by the cult. They've erased him from existence. He's nothing more than an echo, a shell, and the final ritual was never about shedding his identity. It was about destroying it altogether. The forest fades as Adam's world collapses, leaving nothing behind but a perfect, hollow silence. Story 4, The Midnight Rebirths. The first time I died, I thought I'd wake up in heaven, or hell. Instead, I opened my eyes to a place worse than both. Each night, I'm forced to relive my death in increasingly horrific ways. I bleed, I scream, I shatter, but I always return, starting from zero. I watch my fingers blacken and fall away, my eyes explode in a white-hot flash, and still, I wake up whole again, my memories fractured, yet stained with terror. Tonight, I awaken in a pit of writhing bodies. Their faces, twisted remnants of who they once were, cling to my arms and legs. They all wear my face, bloated and grinning, a gallery of past versions of myself. These things, they say they know me. They want me to remember the lives I've lived, each one bloody and shattered, but I know if I remember, I'll never get out. A door appears, coated in thick, wet sinew. I step through it, desperate to leave, but each step is like tearing myself apart, my body shredding into pieces and reforming as I walk. My skin, sloughing off in ribbons, reveals the hollow shell underneath. I pray that tonight might be the final death, but as my mangled face melts in the darkness, I already know the truth. This afterlife has no mercy, no peace. Only endless rebirths in a world stitched together by my own fractured mind, a cycle I can never break. Story 5, The Bloody Rebirths. I thought I'd left everything behind. A life of tragedy, the deaths that haunted me. I wanted a fresh start, a clean slate. But here I am standing in front of a mirror, staring at a version of myself I don't recognize. It's a grotesque image. My arm is gone, replaced by something dark, twisted, like it clawed its way out of the grave just to join me. But here I am, standing in front of a mirror, staring at a version of myself I don't recognize. It's a grotesque image. My arm is gone, replaced by something dark, twisted, like it clawed its way out of the grave just to join me. Each night I feel it grow, reshaping me. It began 3 days after moving into this house. I awoke to a searing pain in my hand and watched in horror as it disintegrated before my eyes, ash falling away until there was nothing but bone. But that wasn't the worst part. Something else, something alive, started to grow in its place. A malformed hand, mottled and bruised, covered in dark veins, each one pulsating with a life of its own. This arm. I could swear it's someone else's, someone whose eyes I see in the shadows just behind me. Night after night, pieces of me fall away. I've lost fingers, my hair, and last night, oh God, last night it was my eyes. I felt them melt, heard them sizzle as they were replaced with new ones, eyes that see things I shouldn't see, things that stare back from places no eyes should be. Tonight it's my legs. I hear the creaking, the snapping. My bones twist, my muscles rot away, and yet I stand. I'm held up by something not my own. My skin crawls with memories that are not mine, flashes of lives torn apart. I feel them in the walls, watching, whispering. This house isn't just haunted, it's reshaping me piece by piece, memory by memory. Each fragment of me that falls away is reborn in another's image, someone who met a grisly end and never left. Starting from zero isn't a fresh start. It's a prison of endless rebirths, a grotesque cycle. And every day I become something more monstrous, more like them. Tomorrow I'll be gone, but I know they'll still be here, waiting for the next person desperate for a new beginning. Clara never knew her great-uncle, but when she stood in his musty attic sorting through his things, she felt like she'd known him for a lifetime. The family had kept away from him, dismissing him as eccentric or downright mad, especially in his final years. His dark fascination with time made his death seem almost poetic. He died clutching his ancient pocket watch. Now it was hers. She found it buried in a wooden box, its once golden surface tarnished, its mechanisms eerily silent. Yet, as soon as Clara touched it, the watch began to tick. She thought nothing of it at first, attaching the heavy chain around her neck. It was just an old heirloom, a quirky relic from a family of oddballs. But when she glanced down at it later that day, the second hand twitched violently, and for a brief second, so brief she almost dismissed it, Clara saw something horrifying, a woman collapsing, her life extinguished in less than a blink. The vision lingered. She could still hear the deafening sound of her heart beating in her ears faster than the watch's cold tick. The image was so vivid, and even though she'd only glimpsed it for 1/10,000th of a second, it burned into her memory. The woman's face. The way her body crumpled, like someone had flicked off a switch inside her. She shoved the watch in her bag, unnerved, but trying to dismiss it as an overactive imagination. 2 days later, the woman she'd seen on the train station news had died, exactly as Clara had seen it. Clara's life took a sharp turn after that. The stopwatch wasn't just showing deaths, it was predicting them. With each glance, someone she knew died. Her neighbor, a colleague, a friend. Every time she watched their final moment in an impossibly short instant, faster than her brain could comprehend, but slow enough for her to feel its weight. Each death was increasingly gruesome, heads split open in car accidents, bodies crushed by falling debris, freak accidents that no one could have foreseen. But the truth clawed at her with every tick. These deaths were tied to her. It wasn't just a coincidence. The pocket watch was cursed, a portal to some cosmic balance sheet of life and death. She could feel it. Every time she looked at the time, she was one step closer to the ultimate price, her own life. The tick-tock of the watch was no longer just a sound, it was a countdown. The deaths she saw were not just random. They were offerings, and soon it would be her turn. Clara tried to destroy the watch. She smashed it with hammers, set it on fire, buried it deep in the woods. But every morning it would reappear back on her nightstand, ticking louder than ever. Each time it came back more twisted. The metal surface was now darker, the ticking more erratic, the deaths more violent. The faces of her victims, the people she saw die, haunted her dreams, their mangled bodies crawling out from the darkness to blame her. She could hear their final screams trapped within the watch's glass. She lost control of her own mind, spiraling into paranoia. Everyone around her became a potential victim. When her best friend, Olivia, came to visit, Clara stared at the watch, knowing what would come. When the second hand ticked, Olivia's eyes rolled back, her body contorted, and blood gushed from her mouth as she dropped to the floor. Clara screamed, holding the watch tighter, its chains burning into her skin. She knew it had to stop, but she couldn't look away, compelled by the grotesque power it held over her. Desperate, Clara consulted with every occultist, priest, and spiritual guide she could find. None of them could help. They spoke of the watch as an ancient relic, something far older than human understanding, a tool once used to control life itself. But Clara had no use for stories. She wanted out. In the end, it was her own realization that sealed her fate. The deaths she saw were not random. They were connected to her in a horrifying way. The watch was feeding on her guilt, her sorrow, her fear. The more she feared death, the closer it came, and now the watch had started ticking faster. The ticking echoed in her ears, rhythmic and inescapable, a heartbeat entwined with her own. She could feel it. The clock was counting down to 0. And then, one day, she looked down at the watch. The second hand stopped. In that brief 1/10,000th of a second pause, Clara saw her own death. Her body, mangled beyond recognition, crushed under the weight of her own guilt. She saw it all, felt every bone shatter, every drop of blood drain from her body. And in that infinitesimal moment, the watch ticked one last time, then silence. Clara collapsed to the floor, the watch still clutched in her hand, its time frozen forever. Clara's lifeless body lay in her dark apartment, blood pooling beneath her shattered limbs. Her face, frozen in an expression of silent horror, stared vacantly into the abyss. The pocket watch dangled from her hand, glinting in the flickering candlelight. Time stopped for her, but not for what lay beyond the veil. In the stillness of death, the air thickened, congealing like blood. A low grinding noise echoed in the shadows, growing louder as the very fabric of reality began to warp. From the corner of the room, a figure emerged, hunched and grotesque, its skin a rotting patchwork of gray and black, dripping with putrid fluids that hissed when they hit the floor. The watchmaker had come for his creation. His face, or what was left of it, stretched into a distorted grin. Half of his skull was exposed, the remaining flesh hanging in gory, meaty strands. One of his eyes bulged grotesquely from its socket, while the other had been long gouged out, replaced by an ancient gear ticking inside his hollow skull. His fingers, long and skeletal, were fused with metal, rusted cogs and gears embedded into the bone. This creature was no human. He was a relic of something far older, kept alive by the cursed watch that now clung to Clara's soul. The watchmaker knelt over her body, his cracked lips pulling into a smile as he reached for the pocket watch. The second he touched it, Clara's blood surged toward it like a magnet, crawling up the chain and sinking into the gears. With each pulse, the watch began to tick again, louder and more erratic, as though feeding on her death. "I've waited for you, Clara," the watchmaker whispered, his voice like grinding metal. "You think you're done, but no, your time is still mine." As he spoke, Clara's body jerked, her eyes snapping open, filled with terror. She was awake, somehow conscious in this liminal state between life and death, trapped in her own corpse. She could feel the watchmaker, his cold, oozing presence smothering her like a wet, decaying blanket. Her body convulsed violently, but she had no control. She could only watch. Suddenly, the watchmaker's voice twisted. "It's not me you should fear, my dear. It's you." His smile widened, teeth falling out with a sickening crack as his form began to warp. Flesh peeled from his face in long, disgusting strips, revealing what lay beneath, a twisted reflection of Clara herself. She screamed, but no sound came. The watchmaker, looked at her with hollow eyes. The horrifying truth hit her like a sledgehammer. The watchmaker wasn't some ancient being, but the dark, rotting version of herself, created the moment she touched the cursed watch. Her death had not been the end. It had been the birth of her as the watchmaker. She was the curse, the one who would now pass the watch to the next victim, to perpetuate the cycle. Her insides churned, bones cracking as they shifted. She could feel her skin splitting, blood pouring out in thick, viscous rivers. She was transforming, her human form breaking down to reveal the monstrosity she was always destined to become. Gears embedded themselves into her skin, turning her muscles into sinewy machinery, her organs fusing with metal, pumping thick black oil instead of blood. Part 3. A Twist of Fate. Suddenly, the room began to distort as time itself unraveled. The next victim was approaching, drawn by the curse like a moth to a flame. The watchmaker, now fully transformed into Clara's twisted reflection, laughed as the shadows coalesced into a shape. A young woman, unknowingly walking into the apartment, drawn to the cursed object lying at Clara's feet. The woman picked up the watch, curiosity in her eyes. But something was wrong. As soon as her fingers brushed the metal, the air exploded with violent energy. The watch rejected her, the ticking growing louder and more aggressive. The gears within it twisted violently as though rebelling against its new victim. Clara, in her watchmaker form, felt the pull of something far more ancient and malevolent than herself. "No," Clara rasped, her voice shredded and metallic. "It was supposed to be you." The young woman smiled, too knowingly. Her eyes gleamed with a sinister light, and suddenly the air shifted again, this time colder, darker. The young woman wasn't just a victim, she was something more, something far older, more dangerous than the watch or the curse. She whispered a single word, one that echoed through the dimensions Clara now inhabited. And with that word, the watch exploded into 1,000 pieces, sending shards of reality crashing into one another. Part 4. The True Master. As Clara, now the watchmaker, lay broken and disoriented in the collapsing world, she looked up at the young woman who leaned down with a smirk, her eyes glowing with ancient fire. "You thought you were in control of time, didn't you?" she said, her voice laced with venom. "You were only ever a puppet." The woman extended her hand, and with a single flick of her finger, the entire dimension shattered. Time itself crumbled, and Clara's form dissolved into the ether, her screams echoing in the endless void. But just before she was obliterated, the woman whispered in her ear, "Now it's my turn."